everybody again for being here. And as you're coming in, we're looking forward. We'd love it again if people can put where they're calling from in the chat, so we know where people are from. But welcome to our Friday Digest series, and thanks again for being here. Happy New Year. I'm Kristen Harpison. I'm Political Director for Maryland League of Conservation Voters. And as always, your presence here speaks to the power of our community and your commitment to the environment causes that affect us all. Our goal with these Friday Digests is to provide you with information, tools, and resources to be an informed and active advocate. We also want the agenda for these virtual meetings to be driven by what you are interested in and what you want to hear. So please let us know. The easiest way to provide this information is to fill out the survey that you'll receive at the end of this program. And again, as you're joining, please type your name into the chat and tell us where you're joining from. And as we move for the half hour we have together today, type your questions and comments in the Q&A or chat box, and we'll get to as many of them as we can as we answer the question today, get through today's conversation. Today's session is timely as we lay out plans for our strategic plans for the legislative session, which kicked off on Wednesday at noon. And as always, our legislative priorities focus on key environmental challenges and opportunities in Maryland. The focus is not only core to our mission, but helps Maryland to achieve its environmental and climate plan goals. Our goal today is to provide an overview of some of these key issues, and we'll take a deeper dive into any number of these and other issues throughout the session. So stay tuned every week. And again, let us know what you want to hear about. At the end of last year, Governor Moore's administration unveiled Maryland's Climate Pollution Reduction Plan, which is designed to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions requirement of 60% by the year 2031. And in addition to supporting this plan, we are focused on pushing for a future powered by 100% clean energy. This involves a multifaceted approach encompassing environmental justice, sustainable land and water conservation, and of course, equitable policymaking. Today's meeting, I'm thrilled to be joined by my superb colleagues, Rebecca Rear and Marissa Olszewski, who are part of our amazingly skilled policy team at Maryland LCV. Together, we'll go through our legislative priorities and the plan of action for this legislative session. And at the end, we'll open the floor to questions from you, our audience. And at any time, again, please submit your questions into the Zoom chat or the Zoom Q&A box, and we'll get to them, as many of them as we can at the end. Our 2024 priorities include advancing solar energy across the state, environmental justice, and sustainable land and water conservation. These initiatives are integral to our mission of advocating for clean water, healthy air, and climate-resilient communities for everyone in Maryland. One of our top priorities this session is supporting legislation that helps us achieve our solar goals. Maryland has an ambitious goal under the Renewable Portfolio Standard, or RPS, which aims for 14.5% of our renewable energy to come from solar by the year 2030. We have fallen way behind in reaching that goal. So we need to, in order to reach that goal, we need to make strategic investments and take policy actions to help to encourage solar deployment. Fundamentally, some of these problems are due to solar permitting and economic barriers to construction of projects on places like rooftops and parking lots. Overcoming these barriers is essential to accelerating our transition to a sustainable energy future. This session, we're working on legislation that begins to address these barriers to solar development, including looking at solar permitting to make it more streamlined and efficient, and to balance our energy needs with environmental preservation and community interests. We'll also be supporting legislation this session that seeks to incentivize solar energy on preferred sites such as rooftops, parking lots, and brownfields. These sites offer many benefits, including proximity to energy use areas. And the proposed legislation would aim to create more favorable incentive structure to encourage development in these areas, and also to ensure that state resources are developed in a strategic and targeted manner that supports solar development while prioritizing the needs of low and moderate income Marylanders, as well as those in overburdened and underserved communities. Achieving all of this requires collaboration across many sectors, and we're engaging with stakeholders, industry experts, and community groups to ensure that our legislative efforts reflect a balanced and inclusive approach. And we're taking a similar comprehensive approach when it comes to water. So now you've heard enough from me. Take a deeper dive into water policy. I'll pass it over to Marissa, our environmental policy manager. Marissa, over to you.
Thank you, Kristen. In fact, yes, one of Maryland LCV's top priorities has always been the restoration and health of our treasured Chesapeake Bay. This session, we're focused on one piece of legislation in particular, and that one aims to address the deficits that we've seen in past restoration efforts for many of our streams throughout Maryland, which flow into the Bay. Broadly speaking, this means we're incorporating a targeted science-based approach that will coordinate the efforts to improve the ecological health of many of those streams and rivers in Maryland. But before I tell you about the legislation specifically, I'd like to provide a little context. So as we approach the deadline for the goals that were set in the Chesapeake Bay Agreement, that's the agreement shared among the 6 states and the District of Columbia, making up the entire Bay watershed. We're all aware that we have made progress, but we are not on track to meet our pollution reduction and restoration goals by that goal date of 2025. So last month here, we hosted a webinar in which we looked more closely at a report that the Chesapeake Bay program released last year. That was called the Comprehensive Evaluation of System Response. And that report examined ways in which restoration efforts have fallen short in the past and how they could be adjusted for more successful outcomes in the future. Some of the recommendations from that report are things like putting more effort and emphasis on restoring shallow water habitat and improving those connections between people and the resource. And those are addressed in this bill that I want to tell you about, brought by our Maryland Bay Commission representatives. They are Senator Sarah Elfreth and Delegate Sarah Love. The legislation that we're supporting, and we are prioritizing it, it's being called the Whole Watershed Approach, or the Whole Watershed Program. It aims to establish a pilot program which will identify and focus restoration efforts in 5 distinct watersheds in Maryland. The areas will serve as a model for how coordinated science-based efforts can lead to more successful restoration and protection. Rather than a fragmented approach, piecemeal across the state, what we're advocating for is a strategy that's comprehensive and coordinated. It'll target these watersheds, ensure that every action taken in them, from forest management to the agricultural practices, they're all efforts that contribute to the overall health and well-being of the watershed. And this would be a large shift in how we tackle water quality and ecosystem restoration in Maryland. The program, in part, is modeled after a successful effort to restore streams in a large watershed in southern central Pennsylvania. In that case, the agriculture was the predominant land use there, but this program in Maryland will take the idea of that and their successes and apply those to areas in Maryland with other land uses as well. So in addition to agriculture, we will be tackling the widespread urbanization and the other diverse geographies that Maryland has. One of our challenges in Maryland has been that those areas have significant non-point source pollution, and that pollution has proven more challenging as a source to address. We're advocating that this bill could provide a demonstration of how targeted restoration efforts in specific watersheds can have more significant impact on restoration. And another way to put it is we're looking at a question. If we put careful, concerted effort and remove inefficiencies from a system of implementation of practices to improve water quality within a single watershed, can we see more rapid progress in terms of stream health? And if so, then implementing a strategy like this across the board could be the key to improving our bay's health. The bill itself prioritizes $20 million over 5 years toward 5 chosen watersheds. They will each represent a different geography, as I mentioned, or a different dominant land use, and they'll be chosen to prioritize overburdened and underserved communities. Really important when we're talking about making that connection again between the resource and people, and also creating a whole community approach in this effort. The program will be required to demonstrate multiple co-benefits. So not just supporting the health of the ecological system, but the overall community, as I mentioned. The bill sets up a program that will be administered under a silo-busting management team. We'll have various members of permitting agencies all together at the table. They'll be there with community members, and all of them together will be responsible for selecting projects, monitoring progress, and expediting permitting in ways that don't cut corners, but remove inefficiencies to work across the watershed scale for this common goal. So the last part I want to tell you is that this bill contains a provision that is separate from the pilot program. It will create a certification program for restoration practitioners. Those are the developers and contractors working in these watersheds, and will help to uphold standards and ensure the quality of the work that they are doing, which is sometimes in very vulnerable ecosystems. So this whole watershed approach, it's about more than environmental protection. It's fostering sustainability across communities and preserving our national treasure, our Chesapeake Bay. So with all that, I'm going to pass it over to Rebecca now, and she will briefly go over some other key additional issues we're working on this session. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much, Marissa. And thanks everyone for being here. I'm Rebecca Rear. I'm the Director of Climate Policy and Justice here at Maryland LCV. And last week you were hopefully on our Friday Digest. We kicked off our 2024 Friday Digest series focused on the climate pollution reduction plan that the state released at the end of last year. And if you weren't on last week and you're curious about that, go check it out on Maryland LCV's YouTube channel. There are several pieces of legislation that are actually mentioned in the plan, things that, policies that'll help us reach our emissions reduction goals that need to be included in legislation. And I'm going to go over those because we know they're going to be introduced in 2024. So it gives us a great opportunity to support the goals, our emissions reduction goals through legislation. First up is Empower reform. Empower is the state's energy efficiency program, and it's run by both the utilities, and then the low income program is actually run through the Department of Housing and Community Development, DHCD, in the state's alphabet soup. And since 2008, Empower has saved ratepayers more than $4 billion on energy bills and also reduced Maryland's greenhouse gas emissions by the equivalent of 9.6 million metric tons of carbon dioxide, aka a lot. So it's we often say that the cleanest form of energy is energy we don't use, which is why energy efficiency is a really important part of our clean energy future. And so there's incentives for weatherization and efficient appliances, and Empower helps Marylanders implement all those efficiency measures. So what the bill does is reform the Empower program to align it with the state's greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals. Right now, it's measured through energy use, and so we're going to switch it to measure it through greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So it's setting those GHG emission reduction goals for the Empower program. It's also going to enable incentives for fuel switching. So you can use Empower money to upgrade to electric appliances, and looking at not using Empower funds to when you're ready to replace your furnace or other appliances in your house, you're not going to use a fossil fuel powered appliance, but rather an electric appliance. We're also looking at things in that bill that would make it so that the Empower funds are, the utilities run Empower, so they can actually use Empower funds to do things outside of the home as well, like transmission lines and things like that. Great, but most of the program should be inside the home or behind the meter, and so it would set some goals around that. It's actually going to be introduced. Advocates are working really closely with the PSC, so it'll be an agency bill, and we're looking forward to supporting that throughout the session. So that's Empower. Next up is removing exemptions for the manufacturing sector from our state GHG accounting. The Climate Pollution Reduction Plan says to meet our climate goals, we need an all of society approach, and we mean all of society. So in 2009, when the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act was passed, it actually exempted the manufacturing industry from reporting and enabling MDE to set regulations to reduce emissions. Every other sector was included, and manufacturing was exempt. But it did call for a study to say, should that be permanent? And in 2022, the Center for Global Sustainability completed a study that said, look, it's going to take everybody. So manufacturing should now be included in accounting for its emissions, and MDE should be able to set regulations for the manufacturing sector. So what this bill would do, it's enabling legislation. So it's to say, we're taking out that exemption and enabling MDE to set regulations for new manufacturers that come to Maryland and current cement manufacturers, which are one of the single largest contributors of greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. So that's the manufacturing exemption, just supporting an all-of-society approach. Next up is reducing vehicle miles traveled. So transportation continues to be the largest source of emissions in the state, over a third. And so we're addressing transportation. There's been a lot of work on EV incentives, so electric vehicle and charging stations, and there's been a lot of talk about electric vehicles, and we need a fully electric fleet across the board for sure. We know that they're quieter, they reduce emissions. But we also need to make investments in public transportation and reduce overall vehicle miles traveled across the state. So a bill this year called the Transportation and Climate Alignment Act of 2024. It would require the Maryland Department of Transportation and regional transportation planning agencies to measure and mitigate any increases in climate pollution and vehicle miles traveled caused by planned highway expansion projects over $10 million. So looking at those big projects. And finally, there's actually 6, but we're going to go over 4 of the policy priorities listed in the Climate Pollution Reduction Plan. One of them's EV incentives, and the other one we're not covering today is funding. And if you want to hear more about that, tune into last week's episode. So the last one is the Reclaim Renewable Energy Act. And I already saw a question in the chat about this one, so happy to proactively answer that. And so in 2011, Maryland added waste incineration to our state's renewable portfolio standard. So that means that they get renewable energy credits. They're eligible for renewable energy credits from the state. The state's investing money in waste incineration as a renewable energy source. So this bill, all it would do is say, we're taking trash out of the RPS. So the state shouldn't be investing, money in trash incineration. And importantly, going back to what Kristen was talking about earlier, that frees up the renewable energy credits available for things like solar and wind, which we worked on last session to pass a big bill on that. So the Reclaim Renewable Energy Act, taking trash out of their RPS is part of the climate plan. It's also part of the Maryland Commission on Climate Change recommendations from 2023. So we'll be looking closely at that one. And then we're also looking at legislation that would give the Maryland Department of the Environment the authority to consider multiple factors, including an environmental justice score when issuing certain permits. They currently do not have the authority to make decisions about permits based on an environmental justice score, even though there's been a lot of progress over the last few years in defining overburdened and underserved communities and launching an EJ screening tool and requiring certain permits to have an EJ score included in the application. MDE does not have the authority to make a decision based on that score. So taking a look at how MDE makes its decisions about permits and incorporating environmental justice into that decision-making process and authority. So nice handful of bills that we're looking closely at throughout the session.
Thanks, Rebecca and Marissa, for that remarkable overview. And in addition to some of those legislations, I want to bring up a couple other things that we are going to be working on and supporting, including, so as environmental advocates, we are keenly aware that the importance of elections play in determining our state's future, including the future of our environment, our ability to pass strong environmental legislation. So we need to make sure that everyone in Maryland has a voice in the process, which is why we are supporting the Maryland Voting Rights Act, sponsored by Delegate Stephanie Smith and Senator Charles Sidner. The act aims to address historical and ongoing voting rights abuses and discriminatory structures in our local governments. The legislation would enhance voting rights protections, address language barriers, and prevent voting intimidations, and help ensure a fair and equitable voting process across the state. We're also paying close attention to innovative solutions such as the Network Geothermal Initiative, sponsored by the remarkable Delegate Laura Charkoudian, last year's climate champion, which is an exciting opportunity to explore sustainable heating and reducing our dependency on polluting energy sources. So with that, we've thrown a lot at you, and we have about 10 minutes left for questions. I know that one of the questions was about bill numbers. Many of the bills have not been added. They're not coming out of drafting. So we'll be certainly keeping you posted as soon as bill numbers are released. And so which is an opportunity for me to remind you to get signed up to receive our Conservation Weekly every week, which will give you updates on all of these and other legislation that we're tracking and working on, and include information such as bill numbers and how we act and when it's right time to act. In the chat, the bill numbers that we have, we are adding into the legislation, into the chat. Marissa, there have been a couple questions for you on the whole watersheds. The first we've gotten a couple times is, which 5 streams are being included?
Yes, and that is a great question that I failed to clarify in my remarks. The streams themselves, the actual watersheds that are going to be included, are not determined by the legislation. The legislation determines the number and how the structure will be set up to have a group of people from the various departments who are interested and involved in the permitting of watershed restoration practices, as well as community members who will come together to make the determination of which 5 watersheds will be included in the pilot program. So that will be to be determined once the legislation is passed and getting implemented.
Great. And on the same, Greg, there's a question about a little bit more detail about how this whole watershed approach is different than previous water conservation efforts.
Sure. And I think with that, I'll also answer there was a question about the types of restoration activities that would be sort of included or incentivized. So one of the things that's been important as the crafting of this legislation has come together is to ensure that we are really focused on incentivizing upland practices, the kinds of things that happen out of a stream that affect the water going into the stream. So we're trying to get as close to the pollution sources as possible to make better outcomes for the water moving into those ecological systems. And so the bill has we've really worked to put together language that will incentivize those upland practices because they're really important and because they tend to carry more co-benefits with them too. So you're getting better bang for your buck. You're getting more for each community as you install those sorts of things. And that will be a little bit of a shift because those are hard practices to implement. A lot of them, when you're looking at non-point source pollution, are on private property, and it's hard to get access to that private property and to get that permitted on a comprehensive level across the watershed scale. So all of these things will help to make all of that easier and hopefully happen more quickly.
Great, thank you for that. That is very helpful. This is going to be an important bill and a little bit complicated. So we'll have to we might have to come back to this as it progresses. To make sure that
I imagine we might be back here, Kristen, talking about this bill again with more
I think
detail.
it's likely. Anyway, and I see there are a number of other questions, one of which is, to what extent do you coordinate legislative priorities with other groups like Sierra Club, CCAN, et cetera? I'll take a first stab at that, and my colleagues can jump in for anything that they want to add to it. So Maryland League of Conservation Voters is one of probably 50 groups working in statewide environmental policy across in Annapolis. We work closely with them all in different ways and in different priorities. There is actually a coordinating table, which Maryland LCV chairs, that gets together every week during legislative session to make sure we all know what we're all doing, because we're stronger together. And so groups like CCAN and Sierra Club, as well as some grassroots groups, the Interfaith Power and Light, some of the all different kinds of groups from all over the state that work in these issues, and we coordinate as much as we possibly can. when you see the Conservation Weekly, or if you sign up for the deeply wonkier hot list, which we release to legislators every year, every week during session, you'll see things listed as Maryland LCV priorities, or Maryland or environmental community priorities. And environmental community priorities may also be Maryland LCV priorities, but they also have been identified by this larger table, which is known as Citizens Campaign for the Environment, as the priorities that we all vote on as the most important for this year. And this year, there are 3 priorities that were identified as the top legislative priorities for the environmental community this year, one of which is the Empower Act, which we heard about today, as well as the whole watershed approach, which Marissa's talked about. The other one has to do with the Clean Water Justice Act. And I would say that for all of these, it is a plug for coming to the Maryland Environmental Summit, which is on January 31st in Annapolis. So look for more information on that. So we do work very, very closely with partners, because this action can't happen without all of us. It needs coordination from partner organizations. It needs you. We can't do it without you. So to get to the other question, so if Marissa or Rebecca, do you have anything to add to that? And then the other question is, how can people get involved in supporting these priorities?
Yeah, the only other thing I'll add is that CCE is a great opportunity for environmental organizations who are active in Annapolis to get together and coordinate. We are also very aware that there's organizations and individuals who care deeply about these issues and want to pass strong laws and policies and see them implemented in an equitable way to improve health and their environment, who don't have capacity to get in the weeds in Annapolis. And so we're trying to make sure that folks who are community-based or focused locally, or are all volunteer and can't take a day off work to come hang out in Annapolis during the day of a hearing when you don't know what time your bill's going to get called up to give your 3 minutes, and you had to drive 3 hours anyway. So why come and give your 3 minutes? So we try to make sure that what we're doing in Annapolis is also reflective of not just the folks who, collaboration among folks who get in the weeds and the nitty gritty here in Annapolis, but also are living their lives and breathing the air and drinking the water and enjoying green space across the state. And that's really where when we work and we try to root our work in justice and equity, it's listening as much as it is acting here in Annapolis. And so that's the only additional piece of the partnership roles we try to play, and people can get involved by calling their representatives. So you don't have to come to Annapolis if that's not feasible for you. Public transit to the state capitol, it's not that great, but pick up the phone, write an email. We, along with many other groups, try to make it easy for you by building action alerts that you get right to your inbox, or always visit our website, or retweet us or like it on Instagram, whatever social media outlet is your choice. But pick up that phone, call someone, write to someone, tell them about the issues you care about. And again, whether that's signing on to something we wrote, or writing a personal letter, or making that personal phone call during session. We've gone over 8 bills today. There's going to be 2,500. So it's really, total. So it's really important that you pick up that phone, you write that letter, and make sure the folks who represent you in Annapolis are taking your voice and your thoughts into consideration.
Yeah, the only way that they'll know what you think, and they're making decisions with you, is if you tell them how you feel, and how this legislation affects you. And this is the most important thing that they can hear. Your voice is critical. I like to say that if government is not, if you are not participating in government, then they're making decisions without you, and they should be making decisions with you because it affects you. And sadly, I think that is, Marissa, unless you had anything else quick to add, we're just running out of time. And
yeah, I think that's all great. I don't know if you mentioned, Kristen, but we did confirm our keynote speaker for the summit.
We did
And
not
someone
mention
asked the
that.
connection between what we do at the state level and what we do at the federal level. And I won't fully answer that question, but I will say that we have gotten U.S. Senator Ben Cardin to confirm that he will be at our summit on the 31st. So we can hear him then.
Oh, great, thank you. And we didn't get to all the questions, but hopefully we'll be able to answer some of them in future Friday Digests. And thank you again so much, both of you, for all your work and your knowledge. And to our audience, thank you for joining today and for your support of our work. If you have questions that weren't answered, feel free to drop them to us by email to our team. And before you leave, we just want to make sure that we respond. Again, we've mentioned this a few times. The Environmental Summit on January 31st is always a great opportunity to talk to other advocates and we often get a really good turnout of legislators. So it's a time to see them in person and to make your voice heard. Also, we're on January 17th, this coming Wednesday. Maryland LCV is holding a rally on Lawyers Mall in Annapolis at 11:30, rallying to action on the climate plan. It will be a really great opportunity to show your support for climate action in Maryland. And we'll have a few guest speakers. So mark your calendar and save the date. And again, thank you all so much for being here today. Please fill out our short 5-question survey and we'll see you next week. Take care, everybody.